Welcome back to the Play-by-Play, a sports media talk show from Awful Announcing, where the NFL draft is upon us. I have a partner in crime who's getting Travis Hunter, I believe. There's a lot going on, but we are talking wrestling. We're talking college football. We got a lot to dive into. I'm Brendon Kleen, a staff writer at Awful Announcing. That over there is Ben Axelrod, a senior editor at Awful Announcing. Is it Hunter or bust? How are you feeling about the draft, Ben?
I'm pretty confident it's Travis Hunter at this point. I think the consensus is, the Browns obviously need a quarterback, but it's kind of a one quarterback draft in terms of sure things. And it's just a roster devoid of blue chip talent. So, getting a transformational prospect like Travis Hunter, regardless of where he plays, probably makes a lot of sense.
Thought you'd be more excited. I thought I was throwing you something to hype you up for the week. No, you can't. No Browns topic gonna hype you up.
Yeah, yeah. I'm so dead inside when it comes. Let's talk Cavs playoffs.
Yeah, well, we will eventually. I think once they get past the corpse of the Miami Heat, the Jimmy Butler-less Miami Heat. But our instant replay for this week, WrestleMania 41, goes down with. I put a whimper in here. You were there. You're going to give us your live instant reaction. It felt like it wasn't the best by any means, and the very end of the main event on Sunday was, from my vantage point, corny to say the least. The wrestling over the belt was a little overdone, but take us inside Vegas. Take us to Vegas. Take us inside the name of the stadium, Allegiant. There we go, that I could not remember, and everything you saw.
Have you been to Allegiant Stadium by chance?
I have. I went for actually a Chelsea. I didn't plan that. A Chelsea match when they did their U.S. tour 2 years ago. It's a cool stadium.
I was actually underwhelmed by it. I've been to
Okay.
some of these big stadiums, and all, like Dallas or Arlington, the Cowboy Stadium, has a lot of amenities and it feels like a spectacle. This just felt like Vegas needs a big stadium. It's going to be big enough to host, a crowd for WrestleMania or the Super Bowl or from a Premier League match. But in terms of amenities and things of that nature, it felt like a very bare bones NFL stadium. So that was one of my takeaways. Was I just thought
that's fair. I have been to very few of those, and I think the newest stadium in Phoenix was built in 2006.
Yeah.
So I don't have a lot to pull from. To me, it was like, this is pretty cool. This is really nice, But
Yeah.
I'm sure that it doesn't compete. Atlanta's beautiful from everything I've heard, and LA, of course. But anyway, What did you think of the actual wrestling?
Yeah, so this was my 5th WrestleMania I've been to, and it's always fun. It's always a spectacle. And one thing I've learned to do when it comes to going to these shows and even going to Browns games on the road and traveling for sporting events is you almost have to divorce the actual event and its outcome from your enjoyment of the trip. Otherwise you're going to, spend a lot of money to spend a weekend in Tampa and watch the Browns lose to the Bucks, and it's going to ruin your entire trip. And so it's if the show's...
The first problem was you picked Tampa.
Yeah, I know. That was my my big destination a few years ago. The show itself was solid. It's 2 nights now, and I thought that night 1, the undercard was kind of lacking, but the main event was awesome. Night 2, the undercard was a lot better, but the main event was kind of a disaster. And I think the main event being a disaster is the most notable part of it, because that was the match between Cody Rhodes and John Cena, which was built out of John Cena's heel turn, which we talked about on the show previously. And that was WWE's big mainstream story heading into the weekend. If something was going to make SportsCenter or make First Take the way John Cena's heel turn did, it was going to come from this match. And by and large, it was a disappointing match just in terms of the wrestling between John Cena and Cody Rhodes. The finish fell really flat. You had Travis Scott involved, which kind of set up the expectation that The Rock would be involved, and The Rock never showed. And so once you got to John Cena winning the championship and winning his record 17th championship, it kind of just fell flat for everybody there. So there was definitely, literally people looking at each other saying that was it. And then getting up and leaving. So, we'll see. But I think that, that was kind of the gist, is that it was a solid show, but the main event really fell flat.
I tried to watch quite a bit of this because I was on my couch with the NBA playoffs all weekend, and I knew you were there and we were going to talk about it. But as always, I am like, I mean, I'm like pre-K level of awareness of what's going on. But I was interested in the McAfee side of it as an announcer. I was interested in the Cena side of it, and actually didn't even. I was watching Sinners instead of the main event on Sunday, so I missed that as well. I had to catch up via the WWE X page. But it just, yeah, I mean, even just hearing you and our producer Phil talking about it before, it's like it felt like just a kind of a botched plan, like the build up into the actual event and bringing all the tentacles of it together and the awkwardness of like, well, Travis Scott's the ingredient of the Cena heel turn that maybe we wanted the least to be part of it again, yet he's here and The Rock's not, and it was just usually I feel like they most of the time nail the big stuff, and that this one just felt like kind of an unnecessary mistake given that why did you do the heel turn that way if you weren't going to follow it up, right?
Well, so last year's WrestleMania main event was Cody Rhodes versus Roman Reigns, and like it was a match full of surprise interference and returns, and The Undertaker and John Cena and The Rock all getting involved. And so it created like this expectation that this main event would be the same because you had so many of the same ingredients at play. And I think that's really like what they missed the mark on here is so much of good booking in professional wrestling is managing expectations. And so when The Rock was the one who was the catalyst for John Cena turning heel, which is what set up this entire storyline, even though you didn't have The Rock explicitly advertised to be involved at WrestleMania, it created the expectation that he was. And even walking into the stadium, my friend and I were joking and saying, like, what are we going to call these matches in the future? Because it seems like a very specific style of match for Cody Rhodes, where you have all the bells and whistles and you have surprise interference and you have surprise returns from legends. Like, and there was just this general expectation that that's how this match would go, even though The Rock wasn't advertised. And then when you had Travis Scott get involved, like I turned to my friend and I like literally did the like, if you smell, because like that's like that's what we thought was coming next. And the fact that it never came, just really, I think a poor managing of expectations from WWE. And, in terms of the backlash they've received, which is interesting because they've been on such a roll creatively. This is kind of the first real backlash they've gotten. It feels like they have no one to blame but themselves.
So when we first talked about the Cena heel turn, it had kind of been assumed like this WrestleMania would be his last hurrah. Like, how much longer is he going to be around now that he obviously won the championship and was he on Raw yesterday? Like, he's still kind of on a little soft landing here, right? But how long is the Cena arc gonna last before he really hangs it up?
Well, so taking him at his word, which is always dangerous to do in the world of professional wrestling, like 2025 is it. Like he's retiring at the end of the year.
The calendar year.
Yeah. And so that's playing into the storyline. He even like did it on Monday Night Raw earlier this week, was like, I only have 26 dates left and I'm still the champion. So basically like the implication is somebody has to win this belt from me before I leave, or else I'm going to retire as the last real champion and break the lineage. So that's kind of how they've played into the heel turn. But I just think the frustrating thing for me is, as somebody who's a wrestling fan, it was so cool to see the mainstream attention they were getting from the John Cena heel turn. I mean, it literally was being touted as one of the biggest moments in professional wrestling, and it felt like it at the time, and they just totally squandered it. They just totally just fell on their face with it. And it's almost like you almost wish John Cena didn't turn heel if this is how it was going to play out. So that's been the most disappointing part for me.
Well, the reason I ask is I guess they still have some time to salvage it, right? I mean, it won't be on the stage of WrestleMania, but there is still hope that they could make an arc that works over the rest of this year and hopefully give one or two big moments the rest of the way with him. But I think the thing that did break through the most and was kind of the most unexpected was the Paul Heyman thing, right? And I think that's where it intersects with our world even more. Because Heyman is a long time, has relationships with Roman Reigns and CM Punk, and was involved in a match with the two of them, but ended up taking the side of Seth Rollins, and he wins the match. And there's some Heyman shenanigans, and he's a legend and a Hall of Famer and a historic figure in wrestling, and played it up as well as you possibly could have, all the way through an interview with Pat McAfee on Monday's Pat McAfee show, where he brought the pro wrestling to the McAfee show, I feel like, in the most prominent way that we have seen since that intersection really happened. And of course, the ESPN of it all doesn't help matters for whatever the executive. Imagine what, like, who's the woman who runs like the parks division at Disney that's names has been thrown around to be the CEO? Imagine her watching the Pat McAfee show interview with Paul Heyman on Monday morning. Like, just absurd. But he's referencing this Shannon Sharp lawsuit that we're going to let continue to simmer before we go into it here on the podcast. He's talking about playing out a conversation he may or may not have had with Pat McAfee, a very high Pat McAfee, talking about money and Stephen A. Smith and all this stuff. And I don't know, not the type of thing that we are accustomed to seeing on ESPN, Ben.
I'm not going to accuse anybody of anything, but I will say something that I think that gets lost in translation here is how different it is to have WrestleMania on the West Coast, and especially in Las Vegas, because just, time and time zones and your body clock and all that. So that show was airing at 12 p.m. Eastern time. Paul Heyman was on the show roughly 10 a.m. local time. He had WrestleMania the night before. I know he was heavily involved in the Tony Hinchcliffe roast. I'm curious how much sleep Paul Heyman got before that McAfee appearance, because he was on one. And I think
it's 9 a.m. local, right? Vegas Pacific time.
That's when it started.
But he was into it a little bit. Yeah, it was a couple hours. It was an hour in. Yeah.
So
But McAfee, I mean, who knows? All bets are off for him. Whatever his call time was, 7:30.
Yeah, it's really actually crazy he was doing that show live from Las Vegas as long as he was, knowing how those nights go in terms of just the performers. But I mean, Paul Heyman, for those who are like unfamiliar, is a longtime manager and a legend, and probably like the best talker in professional wrestling history. And his whole thing is kind of like blurring the lines between fiction and reality. And so, like, to have him
kind of seems like he's one of the only real old school guys that's left as like a prominent figure week to week. Is that fair? I mean, who else is like really front and center that kind of pulls that type of...
What do you mean by old school?
Old enough to have literally been across all the eras of wrestling, right? I mean, he was in WCW. He's close with McMahon's. He's still doing it now. I mean, how many people are even like that at this point that are still on the show that people know about and see?
Yeah, he goes back to the late 70s, early 80s, I think, and he's kind of crossed paths with all of the biggest stars throughout the industry, from the 1980s to Stone Cold Steve Austin to Brock Lesnar, CM Punk, and Roman Reigns, and now Seth Rollins, CM Punk. So, like, he's very well connected in the industry. He's like highly involved in the company's creative at the high levels. Like when it comes to their main event storylines, he's heavily involved. But he's just kind of like a loose cannon at times too. And that's like how he built his reputation. He ran ECW in the mid 1990s. And so, I mean, the fact that it's 2025 and he's like the main character in WrestleMania main events is absolutely nuts. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. And then I don't know how much you want to get into this or if we want to move on, but I thought WWE's PR push last week was really fascinating. And the way they were, WWE has traditionally been apolitical for good reason in terms of the demographics of their fan base. And I think you saw them kind of take a UFC approach to aligning with right-wing politicians, right-wing figures, kind of, unapologetically backing Vince McMahon in certain instances. I thought it was a really kind of an interesting test run for them. And I think ultimately when you got to WrestleMania and you saw them put Dana White on the screen or Tony Hinchcliffe on the screen and they got greeted with boos, I think it kind of showed you where the fan base sits when it comes to that PR push.
Yeah, I didn't realize that the roast that they did was Tony Hinchcliffe hosted, but I should have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't follow that stuff as closely as you. I mean, in what ways were they aligning with the right wing, like more specifically? Like, what stood out to you that was different than normal?
I thought, Triple H went on record, calling Trump basically praising Trump for the WWE influence in his public persona. You had Roman Reigns in
I did see that.
Roman Reigns, I want to say Vanity Fair. It might have been another publication, but he said he voted for Donald Trump, or heavily implied it at least. And he said he's a registered Democrat. Nick Khan on the Bill Simmons podcast, he didn't explicitly say anything, but he made some comments about the election and how, one candidate was telling you what they would do for you, and the other candidate was just telling you not to vote for the other guy. And then made some kind of strange comments about Los Angeles and how it used to be a place where nobody would judge you, and now it's a place where you get judged for your politics. And so, and then John Cena coming out and saying,
LA, famously centrist, right?
yeah. And then John Cena coming out and, saying he'll always, that he loves Vince McMahon, and then Triple H thanking Vince McMahon in his Hall of Fame speech. It like each instance in and of itself, was fairly benign, I think. But as a whole, it felt coordinated. It felt like WWE kind of wanted to, I don't know if it was appeal to the right wing or to appeal to right wing content creators, but it all felt very coordinated to me, at least.
What's interesting is, like, why do they feel like they have to, right? Because like you said, I mean, from the standpoint that maybe they had historically operated, it was like, let's just not mess with a good thing, or let's not like maybe lean too far left and upset the people who might watch the show, who are more kind of run of the mill, middle America, whatever you want to say. But to feel like they have to double down in that direction, or that they would, we obviously know the Vince McMahon Donald Trump relationship. We know the WWE Donald Trump relationship. There's not exactly like a secret about that. The Dana White UFC, maybe creative influencer. Like, it just feels like, why make the subtext the real text when you don't have to? That, like, what would be the point if Nick Khan's saying, hey, let's do this, or Triple H is saying, let's do this, or whatever, why?
My theory on it would be they've seen the success that UFC has had with it, and that's kind of how UFC has found its footing in the Trump era. And especially so, I'd say, over the last 6 months. And maybe they wanted to just kind of float a trial balloon to see if they could do the same with WWE. But you look at the demographics of WWE's audience, it's, a surprisingly liberal audience, I think. And, like I said, they showed Dana White twice on night one. He got booed out of the building. They showed Tony Hinchcliffe and Colby Covington. They all got booed. Like, WWE fans kind of, vote with their voices when it comes to this stuff. And I think that's what you saw this weekend.
There was also the insane rumor that probably didn't hurt them, that Donald Trump was going to be there and be involved in the creative, which was like, what in the hell are we talking about? Like, the Secret Service is going to have to be in the ring here. Like, he is the president. We realize he's not just the Battle of the Billionaires guy or whatever, right? Like, I like couldn't even tell how seriously I wanted to take that, but I believed it a little bit because it's Donald Trump. And of course it didn't come to pass, but maybe it helped kind of gin up some interest around the event too, considering it led to that rumor happening.
There was definitely a point last week where I thought he was going to be there, and it was just a matter of how, like, in what capacity. Would it be like UFC, or would it be in a storyline? I didn't believe for a second he would be involved in a storyline, although once Roman Reigns said what he said, I kind of started to think, like, is it going to be Paul Heyman in one corner, Vince McMahon in another corner, and Donald Trump in another corner? Like, that's where my head went with that. But yeah,
your investment. You talked at the beginning about, you got to just swallow the money. I mean, that would have been a story you would have told your great grandkids if you were in the building for that type of thing. But okay, let's get into Lee Corso, another legend, I guess, we could say, similar to Paul Heyman if we just want to keep the through line going there. But he is setting his series finale of College Game Day. He is going to make an appearance during week 1 of the 2025 college football season. Say goodbye to the fans, the faithful of the show that he basically made into one of the most, if not the most legendary studio shows in the history of sports TV, and a sport, Ben, that like I don't know if in his wildest dreams he could have expected to be in the place that he's leaving it. And that's the part of it that kind of speaks to me here. And I know there's a lot of nitty gritty we can get into about what the goodbye will look like, what the future of game day will be, replacements potentially for Corso if that ever happens or whatever. But kind of digging into this story last week when ESPN announced it and Herb Street released a statement from Corso and we got a lot of goodbyes and tributes and everything as we always do with somebody of his stature, it was just like, damn, I kind of hope this dude is really letting the moment sink in and being pretty damn proud of what he built, both with the sport and the show and ESPN's coverage of the sport and everything. Like he really, I mean, there's not one single person that probably should own that more than Lee Corso does.
Yeah, I mean, he's the key ingredient to me of College Game Day. I mean, that's, I think, everybody else on that show throughout its history, like you could imagine it with somebody else in their place. They've had multiple hosts. They've had Reese Davis and Chris Fowler. They've had multiple analysts. I know Kirk Herbstreit has been kind of the longtime staple, but like you could imagine that show with somebody in Kirk Herbstreit's place. I don't know who could have done Lee Corso's job. He really is kind of one of one when it comes to that role. And obviously, you know, his prominence on the show and his ability hasn't been what it was previously in recent years. But like you go back to when that show really started hitting its stride, I'd say in the late 90s, the early 2000s, like he was the key component to it. So I think that's well put that hopefully he's, you know, taking this, receiving his flowers the way he should be and is letting this all soak in over the course of the next few months before that final show on August 30th.
It's just cool to me too, when you really think about whether it's, you know, Dick Vitale and his kind of extended goodbye tour or, Mel Kiper, who I'm going to bring up in my hot mic to close things out here. A lot of the people who are the staples of kind of the original wave of ESPN talent. And I know Corso didn't start until the late 80s, and you mentioned when the show hit its stride. He's not like the original cast of ESPN. He was still coaching at that time. But even you look back to like his playing days, which goes back to the 50s, and his coaching days at some different programs and everything else, like it's not always the best. Like it's not always Nick Saban.
Yeah.
Who goes to TV and really just becomes a legend. Like even Charles Barkley, an NBA MVP. Okay, like that kind of makes sense. But I love these stories where it's the people where their ability to connect with fans and be good on television and have chemistry with their colleagues and just get the kind of the blood of the sport that sets them apart from whatever else their relationship might be with the sport. I just think that that's a really special and cool thing that Corso obviously is example 1A of. And of course he's going to be remembered more for game day than what he did at Indiana or as a quarterback at FSU in the 50s before most people alive can even remember, right? Like that's just, it's a pretty special thing to be able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, you just look at his career. He was not a winning coach. Like he had a losing record as a head coach, and it's interesting. Like the conversation naturally shifts to okay, well, who's going to replace him? And you start talking through it, and like you're bringing up like high profile names, like you said, like Nick Saban and Urban Meyer, and all these, even like a guy like Dabo Sweeney. And it's like, it might be PJ Fleck. It might be Brett Bielema. Like it might be somebody we're not even like cause it's not about your resume. It's about your personality. I think with Lee Corso, that's what shone through. I think, his humility and his ability to not take himself too seriously. Like those are the things that established him and established game day as something other than just a typical morning pregame show. And I think, I don't know if you want to get into like who should replace him. I personally don't think they should replace him. Like or at least they shouldn't like actively put that on somebody and say you're the new Lee Corso. Like, you already have that dynamic a little bit with McAfee, and I don't know, like, he seems to be year to year with game day, so who knows at this point. And
as long as college football fans don't get too mad at him, he'll stick around, I think.
Yeah,
is what it seems to be.
We'll see how the athletic survey shakes out this year.
Yeah.
But like, that's like, I just don't think like you actively want to put that on somebody. I think that's too big of a burden.
They have right now, right? They have obviously the anchor, but then they have Herb Street, Howard, McAfee, Saban. Like, that's
right. It's a full
fine.
cast. Yeah.
Yeah. They don't need to. And like you mentioned, I mean, Corso hasn't even been a recurring every week guy for a little bit now. So it's not as if they're missing a key component of the current routines and segments and patter of the show, right? So like, I think for now it's fine. Obviously the question is, how long is Saban going to do this? Because he's retired for all intents and purposes, but now just doing TV. They brought Sanford Steve in to replace the Bear, and like they have the reporting handled with Pete Thamel. Like they have a mix that really works, and the ratings and I think attention around that show speaks to it. And I think McAfee's the star of it right now. So, why risk whatever? I mean, the McAfee-Saban interactions and chemistry we've talked a lot about, and Saban's been really open that it's eased his entree into the show, and obviously Herb Street still gets a lot of attention. Like, I just think they have a really good thing going, and it's kind of a perfect time for Corso to just kind of take the runway off the show and leave it in a good place. Whereas, like, I don't know, pre-McAfee, it might have been, even though he was older, it might have been a little more of an emergency of crap. Like, what is this show even right now if without Lee Corso? Now it's pretty natural.
Yeah, I think if they were to lose McAfee, then that's where you would start to have to look at, like, how do we add someone who makes this feel a little lighter? How do we make this not feel as serious? But like, as long as you have McAfee, like, I think you've kind of filled that void. Like, I don't think it's like a especially unique take to say like McAfee was already on that show to kind of fill the Lee Corso void, even while Lee Corso was still, partially a part of the show. So I do think the question is like, what do you do with the mascot head segment? Because that is one of the show's signature calling cards. But, I mean, McAfee could do that for now. I don't see any reason, or maybe you retire it, but do you think they should do it in the same way, or just still do a pick segment, but retire the actual mascot head thing? That's the question, right? I mean, they're going to do picks. Every show does picks. Yeah, I don't know. I think they'll definitely do picks, like you said. I think the mascot head has become so synonymous with the show that I think they'll try to keep it going. And I think it will probably be McAfee. Maybe they do something where Corso gives McAfee his blessing or something. But I do think it's such an integral part of the show that I think they'll at least try to keep it moving forward.
Maybe they bring it out, but nobody puts it on. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how you do it. Yeah.
The actual mascot joins them on the stage. I don't know. I mean, I think it's kind of McAfee or bust the way the cast is set up right now.
Exactly. I don't think Desmond Howard or Kirk Herbstreit or Nick Saban is.
You don't think it'd be Reese Davis?
Nail the tune of the energy of the fun of that segment. But the thing with McAfee is he always just picks the home team. I mean, for that game, because he just wants the crowd to go crazy, which is fine. But I don't pretend to be I don't have a spreadsheet of Corso's all-time picks to see how often he pulled the same shtick. But I mean, it's part of it. But it's going to be interesting. I don't know. I just, like, honestly, I know I keep circling back to it, but the thing that we're really just in this moment where a lot of these guys are going away, right? Jimmy Johnson, Hubie Brown, whenever Dick Vitale inevitably decides that he's finished, and I understand the difficulty with him getting to kind of feel the satisfaction of finishing on his own terms with the throat cancer that he's had to deal with and the on and off broadcasting. And I know college basketball fans are a little tired of that, but it's really feels like the end of an era. A lot of these really mainstay people who you could trace, like, they have been on sports TV for the entirety of when sports TV has existed, and they're kind of starting to say goodbye.
Yeah, I'm reaching a point at my age of 36 where I remember most of these analysts now, like full careers. Like I remember Greg Olson as a college player. I remember Mark Sanchez as a high school recruit.
Desmond Howard.
Yeah, I mean, there are guys who I don't just remember them playing. I know their full backstories and their full careers. And obviously I can't say the same about, Lee Corso or Dick Vitale or even Jimmy Johnson, but this is,
I have an AI video I can show you if you need a Jimmy Johnson refresh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fox production team really came in clutch there. If you need any reminders, they got it all figured out for you.
Nice.
It is crazy and it's kind of cool, but it's also like, well, at the same time you get to this point and you're like, well, we did appreciate, I mean, we watched them our whole lives. Like we did appreciate it, but you just kind of, you're like, I guess it just comes back to what I said. You hope that they feel the kind of pride of building what they did. And I'm sure Lee Corso does, as the statement that he shared through Herb Street and all the different interviews and everything across his long history have shown. But I'm sure in August we will be talking about this again when the actual episode airs, and it will be a bonanza. I'm sure it'll be very highly viewed. I can't even imagine the hours that people will be waiting to line up to be part of that show. Where do you think it should be? What would be where would you do it? They haven't announced, and there's a couple different options.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you the same thing. So I think the two most obvious options are either Alabama's at Florida State, which is obviously Lee Corso's alma mater. But then the other one, which is where I think it's going to be, and I might just be a homer, is I think it's going to be at Ohio State, Texas that first week. Mainly because, one, that's the biggest game of the week. And two, that's where Ohio State was where he first did the mascot head. I believe it was in 1996. And so you'd have a real full circle moment if he put on that Brutus Buckeye head, or if he wanted to dress like Bevo, the Longhorn, that's fine too. But I think there's just, I think game day always goes to the biggest game. I don't think they, particularly care that Big Noon Kickoff will be there. I think they'd actually probably revel in the idea of overshadowing Big Noon Kickoff's biggest episode of the year.
Agreed.
With the Lee Corso send off. So I think it will be Ohio State, but if they want to go down to Tallahassee for Seminoles, Crimson Tide, I can't fault them either.
I think more people associate game day with Ohio State and the big games than do Corso with Florida State, and so I think just for the symmetry of the show, which it's really a turning of the page for the show more so, I think, than wanting to, I don't think he's going to want to make it. I don't think the producers are going to want to make it just about like him as an individual. And so I think that's probably where they'll go with it. And it's going to be that's going to be a weekend, I would say.
Yeah.
All right. Finally, Stock Watch, the segment where we try to take the pulse of where sports media stands on the biggest stories in the sports world. And this one, Nico Iamaleava to UCLA from Tennessee, a rickety roller coaster of takes and headlines and all of it, ending in, of course, as I said, Colin Cowherd breaking the news that he is going to the Bruins. I almost, can we start here? I want to try to take the side of the people, because I think you and I are both probably going to lean in the direction of this story was a little overblown and blame the NCAA and Congress more so than the kid, right? Like that I think we've covered in the past a little bit with some of these stories. Can we try to take the side of like the Paul Feinbaums and the Bill Plaschkes of the world? Like, is there any argument to the kind of selfishness that Iamaleava displayed, or not even him, but just, is there something to be said for players not just embracing the insanity of this moment and kind of almost being better than those other groups who kind of created the problem? Because I want to be fair and not just always dunk on the old people who bring out the predictable take of these kids are selfish, it's all about the money, blah, blah, blah.
So I think like a fair criticism is how he handled it. Like he did not seem to handle it well. And especially, sitting out practice the day before the spring game. I thought whatever was going on, a story I covered for Awful Announcing with his father calling out Pete Nakos at On 3, who broke the story, calling him out, like basically saying the story was fabricated. And then the next day it turns out, he's sitting out practice and this is totally legitimate. So like that kind of tells me like, not that any of this is ever on the up and up, but like this really something was going on there in terms of how Nico and his family were handling this that I think didn't sit well with a lot of people and I think that's probably where a lot of the backlash is coming from. Cause I don't know, like, so the story is he wanted to go from 2 million in NIL money to 4 million in NIL money, which
he was on like a 4-year contract worth around 10 million through the collective at Tennessee.
Yeah.
And obviously he's played through a bit of that. He wanted to get a raise. Tennessee wouldn't give it to him. As you mentioned, he sits out practice and he basically kind of turns it into a bidding war, just kind of goes into the portal and sits there for a few days. And then whether you believe maybe whatever spin on it, it doesn't seem like he got to 4. I haven't seen a concrete number.
You would think that'd be out there if he did.
Exactly. And now it's sort of the hometown return story and still a fairly big program, although not really. It's not even Tennessee caliber. It is a Big Ten school now, but it's a cellar dweller in that conference. So I tend to agree. Like I think it's almost like if you want to even point fingers at all the powers that be that allowed the situation to get to a point where these haphazardly assembled groups of boosters and car dealership owners and whatever alumni led by a bunch of, ravenous lawyers are running like the financial infrastructure of the sport. And you can and should point fingers and be angry about that because it's just chaotic and it's just nonsense. I also don't think that people like, let's just say the dad here, and set aside, we don't really know what Nico, because he hasn't fully really been involved in the kind of pointing fingers here. It's like, well, you can't be angry at the powers that be and simultaneously take advantage of the chaos. Right. So it's like, I do think the buck sort of stops at a certain point when people are also, the students and the families are also taking advantage of that chaos, just the same way that the schools are and the collectives are and the coaches are. I can't have sympathy for you being a victim of a circumstance that you're also manipulating, right? Like, so I can understand that concept where I don't know if I would go so far as to say selfish or toxic like we did see thrown around here, but I'm also not going to fully go, I think Dan Orlovsky was, kind of, let's have a sympathy party for Nico. It's like, well,
yeah,
he did do this. He made decisions. He chose to evacuate the school and try to get more money and rewrite the narrative in real time. Like, he played a role here and he's taking advantage of it too.
Oh, for sure. And the hard part for me talking about this stuff is like, I don't know how any of these contracts are structured. Like we don't have a SPO track for college football NIL deals. Like, I don't know what's binding. Clearly they're not binding. And so like, like I said, I thought going from 2 million to 4 million for a player for his caliber, that seemed reasonable to me, but I also don't know, like, well, if he had signed a guaranteed contract and this was it, then like, all right, you signed what you signed. And that's how you got to Tennessee. But you also see the market exploding now. And it's like, yeah, I can't really fault him, but I don't think anybody could say he handled this well. And so that's where I understand the backlash. I think the part of the backlash, and you've referenced, things Paul Feinbaum has said and, calling him toxic and people saying they wouldn't take him. Like, I think all of that is going to age poorly in the sense that we're going to have a story like this every year. And like until this gets fixed or until this gets centralized in some way. And I just think like it's almost going to seem quaint that a player wanted 2 million or had 2 million and wanted 4 million when you look at what these numbers will probably look like years from now. So I think I don't think there's been a lot of foresight in the way this has been analyzed either.
The other part of it that I just find crazy that does not get, and this is a little bit like it's an overgeneralization, but I just Googled it to kind of see the latest news as I've been trying to track it. Yesterday, the NCAA released a statement that the board of directors has conditionally approved the pay-for-play, the official pay-for-play thing that we've all kind of been waiting for. Now, NIL and collectives and things are still going to exist. Schools, I guess, are going to get to like kind of choose exactly how much they adopt these new rules, and it looks like they have until June 15th to do so. I just feel like this story is completely being swept under the rug, or just not focused on when we're talking about this stuff. $20.5 million per school in direct financial benefits to student athletes. Like these GM jobs that we're seeing get created, Andrew Luck and everybody else, like this is going to be a part of it. And I guess I just wonder, like from our standpoint, is that going to be treated as, there might not be a spot track for it, but like, are we going to get more clarity? Is it going to be more kind of by the book? How is that going to change the way that because the thing like Bill Plaschke's ran on around the horn, it's beyond time we can criticize these kids as pros if they're making money. And it was funny in real time in that show, Tony Reale was like, well, and we are right now on this show criticizing him for doing that. So let's move on from that 40-year-old talking point, but I wonder how the kind of nature of coverage is going to change when it isn't the Wild West, as everybody loves to call NIL. And it really is Andrew Luck signing a quarterback from Northern California to a $800,000 contract, and even closer to the professionalization of it.
Yeah, I mean, and the other part about this Tennessee story is then UCLA's quarterback goes and signs with Tennessee. And so it's like, are we going to get to the point where we just have trades? Like how professionalized are we going to get to some of this stuff, to your point? I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever get to a point where like we know like what every player is making. From what I've gathered, like a lot of these NIL deals are just being put out there by the agents, and they're not representative of like what the actual value of the deal is. I don't know. And I think the problem with even college football compared to the NFL is it's so many more players, it's so many more teams. That means it's so many more agents. And that's generally how this stuff tends to get out there. And so I think that's kind of what it's going to take. But yeah, I mean, there's no denying how professional all of this truly does feel just from a pure roster building standpoint.
It's like this weird middle ground for like a national columnist or a national TV talking head. It's so complicated. It's in this in-between stage of being fleshed out from a rule standpoint, and college football was already overlooked and difficult to talk about and 2 days old by the Monday headlines and everything else that made it overshadowed in national coverage. And it's like, it's growing. So I think you see more of a pressure to discuss it, but it's probably harder to talk about than ever. It's like, I don't envy some of these people who have to form coherent takes in 60-second sound bites trying to come up with like, what the hell do I say? Like, I'll just call the kid toxic. Fuck it. Like, yeah. Whatever. You know what I mean?
I mean, I used to cover college football. I used to cover Ohio State and the Big Ten. I cannot imagine doing it right now. Like the amount of like legalese that you would have to be brushed up on and the amount of court cases you would have to follow and dealing with NIL and agents and collectives and all of that. Like it would give me the same migraine that discussing RSNs with Drew Lerner gives me. Like, I cannot imagine what that's like on a daily basis, especially during the offseason. I think during the season, it's probably still a lot of fun, but these April, May, and June months for college football just seem like a death march in terms of having to follow legal cases. I cannot imagine what that's like. We should have Chris Vanini back on to talk about it.
Well, and then you talk about realignment and everything else. And
yeah,
I think it was Brian Curtis wrote the piece on the Ringer recently about how college football, like the college football insider beat, is like a C-suite courtroom type of job now, where like, you know, Ross Dellinger or Chris Vanini or those types of people, it's like you're talking to the wealthy benefactor in some small town in the South. You're talking to the corporate lawyer for the NCAA. You're talking to the TV executive and the people on the, you know, CFP committee. It's like, it's not the, you know, scout, the regional area scout for Alabama anymore. That's like your number one source. It's these like really powerful rich people who are suddenly all over everything that matters in college football, which is on Saturday is a sport that is a bunch of 18-year-olds running around tackling each other. Like, it's so bizarre.
Yeah, no, that's it. And I mean, they're the rich people are the ones making the roster decisions because they're the ones spending this money. So I think that's, and that's, you know, just something we don't know how to talk about because to a lot of people, these are, you know, you might know their names, you might not know their names. And they're kind of working on in the shadows on a lot of this stuff.
All right, let's close out with our hot mics for the week. Something that caught our attention, we liked, we disliked, or we just want to shout out. I'll start us off. Going back to an ESPN legend, this got some traction on Monday when Mel Kiper Jr. joined the Dan Patrick show, and Dan talked Mel up for a spot in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And it's Mel's time of the year. We all are used to that by now if you consume sports media. This year's press run has had a different tone to it, where there's been a lot of attention paid to Mel's role in turning the NFL draft into like this huge mega event. And it's kind of caught me off guard because that's been true for a while. I would say especially post-COVID, but maybe even before that, in terms of the, you know, pictures of the throngs of people waiting to just hear the echoes of the first overall pick be called out in the streets of whatever city it's in, and viewership and waiting in the cold and all the stuff we see every year. It's going to be in Green Bay, and it'll be a lot of the same this week. And it's just sort of been odd to me. But I wanted to shout out a different part of Mel Kiper's legacy here, which I am turned off by with a lot of, whether it's athletes you see in media today, or even just some of the more analytical, I don't mean statistics even, I just mean X's and O's coverage, data coverage, even cap coverage, stuff like that that's all around in sports media these days, where Mel Kiper, he had an issue where, like, if you listen to his story, like, he was not taken seriously because he never worked in a front office, and it was thought to be silly that he could have the same level of scouting acumen as others. Of course, this was like 40 plus years ago. I appreciate the type of coverage that he and a lot of other people, and he's just an example because it's draft week and he's famous, to never, like, there's just so many people you hear now where it's like, you want to be working for a team.
Right.
You're not making this for me. You're making this to show off to your sources, and you're making this to kind of like, you know, make up for the chip on your shoulder that you couldn't have the job you wanted, or you got fired from the job you wanted, or you just never got along the path of actually working in the sport or the league or the, you know, whatever the team that you wanted to. And there's plenty of good content that falls into that category. But I really like the people who kind of don't lose, they have their eye on the ball. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And they get, and like Lee Corso, I think fits into this kind of in a way that we were talking about, where it's like the fun, the goofiness, the focus on making good TV, like making good content first and foremost, not getting things right or being the smartest guy in the room. So I'm not saying Mel Kiper is the only person that fits into this or even the first one, but hearing him tell his story so often, it's making me remember when that was kind of the only people in sports media. And now we have to wade through so many people that are really doing something just completely different. And it does wear on me at times.
Do you think that's why like he gets the recognition he does sometimes this time of year is because there's been such a proliferation of draft coverage and people are like, let's not forget the OG here. Like, let's not forget the person who was first doing this and really paved the way, because that's like, when I think about Mel Kiper as a draft analyst now, it's not the same as I did probably even 10 years ago. Like, he doesn't necessarily feel like the foremost authority, sometimes even at ESPN in terms of the NFL draft. I think you've seen them do a lot to kind of promote Field Yates and Jordan Reed and Matt Miller, and kind of Mel drops in with his mock drafts here and there. And obviously he'll be all over the show on Thursday and throughout the weekend. But sometimes I wonder just like if that proliferation, whether it's people seeing it as an avenue to get a job with a team, or people who see it as just an easy industry to cover or a lane to fill. That to me, when you mentioned that, because you're right, he does get his flowers every year. That's what kind of stood out to me is why is that?
I think so. I think, and just kind of like the belief in really football, right? Like, I think just the kind of like stubborn belief that people love football enough that everything football would matter, and to kind of dedicate himself to this corner of it that wasn't so big at the time, where like didn't the NFL not even want the draft or care about the draft being on TV? I think that's part of like what he will say about when ESPN first aired it. And for them it was like the same thing, like it is a football property, we'll gladly take it, because they didn't have a lot of that back then. I don't know, but I think you're right that he's kind of been sidelined, and I don't want to pretend like there's not other people. I think, honestly, if you really are honest with yourself, the most famous and popular hosts and analysts, no matter what period of time you're looking at, you could say what I'm saying about Mel Kiper about them, right? Like, they remember that the audience and the content is the focus, not to get a pat on the back from the GM in whatever city that they want to look good when they go get a drink at the combine next year,
right.
You know?
Yeah. No,
and
that
that's
makes
just
a
the
lot
reality
of
a lot of what it is, right?
Yeah. No, it definitely is. So is this our is this going to be our last draft on ESPN? Will we have a new home next year?
It doesn't seem like it. There was an SPJ headline Monday that it's a kind of done deal almost at this point. I have to say I'm a little surprised, but it might be this NFL media deal that's kind of still lingering, that ESPN might spend up pretty big to just buy the whole damn thing. Maybe they just got desperate enough for the draft and some of the other properties, the NFL Network games and whatever, that they were like, we're just taking matters into our own hands. We're not even allowing this to get to a bidding war. And I don't blame them.
Yeah, no, I think it's something they value, and the value they put on it would probably surprise a lot of us how much they do value it. I think, a general consensus in sports media right now is the two things that matter most to ESPN are the flagship, the streaming service, and hosting the Super Bowl. And when you consider that the NFL draft is related to those two things, in one form or another, like it makes sense that they would put probably a higher value on the draft than anybody would expect it to.
Okay, so we're in NBA playoff season, and I turned down 2 NBA topics you suggested, and we have talked zero basketball throughout this whole episode, which is far and away my favorite sport. So we will close out with your hot mic and finally, mercifully, talk some hoops.
Yeah, we're going to talk some hoops. We're going to talk some Brian Windhorst, who went on like a podcast tour last week. I don't know if it like worked out that way or if there was planning behind it, but he did Bill Simmons. He did Pardon My Take. He did a bunch of local Cavs podcasts. He did our Locked On Cavs podcast that my buddy Danny Cunningham hosts. He did a podcast called The Junkyard Pod. I think he did some others. Like he was just like on a podcast spree. And like to see him do that, obviously somebody of his stature who doesn't need to do that, does not need to be going on local podcasts in Cleveland anymore. I just thought was really cool. Like he is a guy who always gives back. He, as cliche as it is, like never forgets where he came from, is always happy to help. It seems like his content is incredible. I thought the Bill Simmons podcast where they rambled on about international basketball for like 45 minutes. I thought was incredible.
I'm not sure they talked any playoffs, and it was
yeah,
great.
I don't recall a playoff storyline. Maybe LeBron tangentially, but like I don't. It was a lot of international hoops talk and a lot of just like remember when about like the 2023 World Cup. But it was awesome. It was incredible perspective. Talked about, you know, what went into the rant he went on about Luka during last year's finals, went into his response to LeBron's comments about him on McAfee. But just in general, like I thought this was a really cool approach to kind of kicking off the NBA playoffs, and kind of just goes to show like why Brian Windhorst is, in my eyes, the people's champ.
I thought his theory on how LeBron may have misinterpreted the best friend, whatever little, you know, jab that he took was actually probably right, or at least the best guess that I could come up with why he went out of his way, which was that McAfee uses this very obviously photoshopped silly graphic of Windy in the St. Vincent St. Mary's like team photo from the time period when LeBron was winning championships there. And Windy's older than LeBron, didn't actually overlap, even though they both went to the same school, and obviously was not on that very much heavily covered team that there's a whole documentary about. Of course, if Brian Windhorst was running around playing point, I think we would remember it, right? But like, Wendy's guess was that maybe because LeBron doesn't quite get McAfee's whole idea of you know, just goofing around, that he might have misinterpreted that and thought that maybe Windhorst put that photo out or entertained it in some kind of way or something, because even multiple weeks out now, Ben, I still don't have a great answer for why Windhorst caught a stray in all of the Stephen A crap that was going on.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. I don't know if it was like explicit that he thought Windy made that, but I think putting that picture up and then like they were kind of talking shit. And then LeBron's just kind of, I think he got carried away and just like took a jab, and seeing that picture, like probably put that like on the tip of his tongue. Like, oh yeah, this guy who thinks he's my best friend. So I think there is something there, but I just think
we've all been there. You're shit talking and somebody pops into your head, or you see him out of the corner of your eye and suddenly you're randomly mad at them, even though they didn't do anything. Yeah.
Well, and I don't think LeBron necessarily knows the context of McAfee liking Windhorst and like joking around about him. And so like maybe LeBron thought, oh, we're talking shit about Windhorst. Okay, this is what I have to say. So yeah, but I think his perspective on it was great. I think he's handled it magnificently. But yeah, I would highly recommend checking out any of those podcasts because I think they're great.
Last thing, there was a story we didn't hit along the way of all the nonsense that comes up in our crazy little world here, that Windy is a free agent this summer. Do you think he stays at ESPN?
I think so. I think they value what he does. I think that he's so versatile and he can appear on Countdown. He can appear on Get Up. He can appear on First Take, that if like their strategy is going to stay the same, he can report, obviously. If they're getting like serious about podcasting, like they always claim they are, he's a great podcaster. And like, I think he seems like somebody they should value, but Zach Lowe also seemed like somebody they should value, and they cut him loose. So who's to say? But if he doesn't, like, I don't know. Does the Ringer make sense? The Ringer in a little TV action, because the Ringer seems to be putting together like the dream team in terms of NBA analysts.
I don't know how much the podcast matters to him. You know, I would be curious because he kind of just took it over after the True Hoop stuff fell apart over there, and it just became his show. But I don't know. He's going to be a really interesting test case of like what the NBA talent situation looks like at ESPN when Countdown is the B team, you know, because, and even frankly now on Countdown, it's odd a little bit of the time where Shams will be breaking down the latest scoops leading into a big night of games, and Windhorst is at the table sitting there, and you know Windhorst has additional information on that, but that's not his lane when Shams is on the show, and there's a little bit of overlap there, whereas NBC, Amazon, those crews are still very much there's seats at that table left open, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if he gets to be the kind of star of the show there and recurring insider and an actual main voice, even though it's not the studio stuff that he gets to do at ESPN, I could see that maybe being appealing. And as a fan, I kind of like the idea of spreading the wealth a little bit where, okay, Shams is going to give me some stuff one night, Wendy will add some stuff a different night, and rather than it all just being on ESPN. And even TNT, this season, they rolled without kind of a newsbreaker like that because Chris Haynes was nowhere to be found. So maybe it'll be spread out a little bit more. And I don't know, I guess Shams will get shoehorned into Inside the NBA or something, and maybe Windhorst can spread his wings elsewhere.
Yeah, the one thing, though, is I've never gotten the sense that Wendy wants to be prioritize being an insider. I get the sense that he likes this. It's, we said Peter Schrager was coming on to be the Brian Windhorst of the NFL. Like maybe Brian Windhorst just stays at ESPN and is the Peter Schrager of the NBA. Like I think he likes this kind of versatile role. I guess the thing I just have trouble.
And he likes writing, I would say too. Like he still really writes stuff that cuts through, which is rare.
Well, so that's what's like, I just have a hard time envisioning him like on the Amazon set or on the NBC set. Although I guess that NBC has some properties he could probably do some work for. Is just, he's so versatile. Like, I think that's the best part about him is how versatile he is. And I don't know if that versatility can exist like at NBC or at Amazon. Like it feels like a multi-platform place like ESPN is almost like where he needs to be, unless he's going to do something where it's okay. I'm writing for the Ringer and I'm on the NBC or Amazon show. I don't know. He just seems too versatile to pigeonhole.
I'm still curious to see how NBC handles it, because it's not the type of property that football is. I get that, but with the NFL, they have PFT Live with Chris Sims and Mike Florio. That's like a digital show that they do. They have Florio and Matthew Berry as kind of, they still, writing is like a core component of what those two guys do, and they're on Sunday Night Football.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a role like that for somebody, and Windhorst would obviously fit the mold. We just haven't heard a lot about it. It's only not even, 6 months is opening night. We're talking preseason and everything else. Like, it's really not that far away that these companies are going to start airing NBA games, and it still feels like there's a lot of who's going to be doing it over there. So we'll see.
I could tell you if NBC offered him the chance to be their lead international basketball analyst for the Olympics, after listening to that podcast, I'm pretty certain he'd take it.
I honestly don't even think that that's an exaggeration to say that getting to cover the Olympics in a more real way would actually be like hearing how passionate he is. I'm like, he might take a pay cut if he got to do that. I don't know. All right. That'll wrap us up. Hit follow or subscribe if you have not already. We're here for you every single week covering the world of sports media. We're also at awfulannouncing.com doing it, frankly, minute by minute, and on our social media accounts, X, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, Facebook, wherever you are online. We are there as well, and we'll catch you right back here next week.